I thought I had it all: a loving wife, a comfortable home, and a marriage built on trust. Every morning I'd wake up and thank God for giving me a partner like her. She was everything I ever wanted, or at least, that's what I believed. But life has a cruel way of showing you the truth. It started with little things. She began coming home later than usual, blaming work or traffic. Her phone, once carelessly left around the house, was now always locked, tucked into her bag or pocket. I noticed her smiling less, her laughter sounding forced, distant. At first I brushed it off. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe I was overthinking. But the more I ignored it, the louder the voice inside my head grew. Something was wrong. Then came the night that changed everything. She told me she was going out for a girls' night. I didn't question it. I trusted her, blindly, foolishly. But when she returned home hours later, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine, something inside me shifted. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew. I started paying closer attention. Her excuses grew thinner, her time away more frequent. I'd see her texting late into the night, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. The final crack came one evening when I overheard her whispering on the phone. Her voice was soft, affectionate, almost giddy. "I can't wait to see you again," she said, her words slicing through me like a blade. But I didn't let anger consume me. I didn't scream or confront her. No, I stayed calm. If she wanted to betray me, she would have to face the consequences. I wasn't going to sit back and cry. I was going to take control, and I was going to make her regret ever underestimating me. I couldn't live with the doubts anymore. The questions were eating me alive. Was I imagining everything? Or was my wife really betraying me? I decided I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. That's when I hired a private investigator. At first, I felt ridiculous. Who does that, right? But deep down, I knew I was doing the right thing. Within just a few days, the investigator called me back. His voice was calm, professional, but the words he spoke shattered my world. "She's seeing someone," he said. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I have pictures, timestamps, locations," he replied. "Would you like to see them?" I didn't want to. Not really. But I had to. When the envelope arrived, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at it for what felt like hours. My hands trembled as I opened it. And there they were, photos of my wife with another man, laughing, holding hands, even kissing. But the twist? He wasn't just another man, he was younger. Much younger. Barely in his 20s with a cocky grin and an air of arrogance. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. I clenched my fists, trying to keep calm. This wasn't the time to lose control. I flipped through more evidence, receipts from restaurants, text messages full of flirty banter, even a hotel booking confirmation. She'd lied to my face again and again. But instead of confronting her, I made a decision. I wasn't going to storm in and yell. No, that's what she'd expect. I was going to be smart about this. The first thing I did was gather everything. I saved the pictures, the messages, and even her bank statements that showed the money she was spending on him. She thought she was being careful. She had no idea I was 10 steps ahead. A few nights later, she told me she had a work meeting and wouldn't be home for dinner. I smiled and said, "Take your time." But I knew exactly where she was going. Using the tracker I'd placed on her car, I followed her. She parked outside a fancy restaurant, the kind we used to go to when we were newly married. I stayed in my car, watching from a distance as she walked inside. A few minutes later, he showed up, the younger guy, dressed in a cheap suit but acting like he owned the world. They sat by the window, laughing, sipping wine, completely oblivious to the world around them. And that's when I decided to take the first step of my plan. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of them together. Clear, undeniable evidence. But I didn't stop there. I called the restaurant, pretending to be a friend of hers. "Hey," I said to the hostess. I think I left my jacket at the table where my friends are sitting. It's the one by the window. Could you check for me? The hostess walked over, interrupting their cozy dinner. My wife looked startled, glancing around nervously, as if she knew someone was watching. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plant the first seed of doubt in her mind. When she came home that night, I acted normal. I asked how her meeting went. She lied without missing a beat. "It was boring," she said, yawning for effect. I smiled. "I'm glad you're home," I replied, kissing her on the forehead. But inside, I was boiling. The next day, I took things further. I started copying all her texts and emails. I even cloned her phone, giving me access to every conversation she was having with him. It was like watching a movie I couldn't escape. A painful, disgusting movie where I was the fool. In one message, she told him she was planning to leave me. "He doesn't excite me anymore," she wrote. "You make me feel alive." I clenched my jaw. If she wanted excitement, I was going to give it to her, just not the kind she expected. I found out they had another date planned, this time at a hotel. I booked the room next door, arriving an hour before them. I set up hidden cameras in the hallway and waited. When they arrived, laughing and holding hands, I recorded everything. But the real twist? I wasn't just collecting evidence for myself. I was sending it to her parents, her best friends, even her colleagues. Slowly, one piece at a time, from an anonymous account. The next morning, she received a call from her mother. I heard it all. "What's this I'm hearing about you cheating on your husband?" her mother yelled. My wife stammered, trying to deny it, but her voice was shaking. She was scared and I loved it. That night, she came home quieter than usual. She didn't even look me in the eye. I could see the guilt eating away at her, but I wasn't done yet. She thought she was safe, that her lies were still hidden. But I had only just begun. My goal wasn't just to catch her, it was to make her regret every decision she had made. The first part of my plan was to make her life unstable. She came home one evening, her face pale. "Someone sent my boss pictures of me with a friend," she stammered, trying to act casual. I raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's strange," I said, pretending to be concerned. She nodded, her eyes darting around nervously. "Yeah, probably just some mistake." But I could see the panic setting in. Her boss had called her into a meeting earlier that day, questioning her about the photos. She denied everything, of course, but the damage was done. Her reputation at work was starting to crack, and it was only the beginning. The next step was financial. I went to the bank and froze our joint accounts, claiming security concerns. She tried to withdraw money the following day, but was denied. "Hey, there's something wrong with our account," she said, sounding annoyed. "Oh, really? I'll call the bank tomorrow," I replied, shrugging. Meanwhile, I had already moved most of the money into a private account, leaving her access to just enough to cover basic expenses. She didn't suspect a thing, thinking it was a simple glitch. Then, I planted the ultimate trap. I knew she had a habit of meeting him at a coffee shop every Friday. I arranged for a friend of mine, who happened to be a lawyer, to bump into them while pretending not to know her. He casually struck up a conversation, asking about her husband. Her face turned bright red and she stammered, "Oh, he's fine. He's working." The younger guy looked confused. "Wait, you're married?" he asked loud enough for half the coffee shop to hear. She tried to shush him, but the damage was done. People were staring, whispering. She left the coffee shop in a hurry, dragging her lover behind her. My friend sent me the whole encounter, recorded on his phone. That night, she came home furious. "Why are you so quiet these days?" she snapped at me. "It's like you don't even care anymore." I just smiled. "Oh, I care," I said calmly. "More than you know." She didn't respond, storming off to the bedroom. By now, her lover was growing tired of the drama. He started pulling away, canceling their plans, ignoring her messages. In one of their texts, he wrote, "This is too much. I didn't sign up for this mess." Her response was desperate, almost pathetic. "Please don't leave me. I need you." I laughed when I read it. She was losing control, and it was a beautiful sight to see. But I wasn't done. The final part of my plan was the most personal. I arranged a family dinner at her parents' house, inviting all our close friends and relatives. She was hesitant at first, but I convinced her it would be a great way to reconnect with everyone. Fine, she agreed reluctantly. The evening started off normal. Everyone was laughing, eating, sharing stories. But halfway through, I stood up and said, "I'd like to share something important with all of you." Her face froze. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice panicked. I ignored her, pulling out a USB drive. "This is a tribute to our marriage," I said, plugging it into the TV. As the slideshow started, the room went silent. At first, it was pictures of our wedding, vacations, happy moments. But then the tone shifted. The next slide showed a photo of her and her lover at the restaurant, then another of them holding hands outside a hotel. Gasps filled the room. "What is this?" her mother cried, looking horrified. Her father stood up, glaring at her. "Is this true?" She tried to speak, but no words came out. Tears streamed down her face as the final slide played, a video of her whispering sweet nothings to her lover in a public park. The room exploded with anger and disgust. Friends stormed out, her parents yelled, and she just sat there trembling. I stood calmly, watching her world crumble. When we got home that night, she fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness. "Please," she sobbed. "I made a mistake. Don't leave me." I looked down at her, my face cold. "A mistake is spilling coffee," I said. "This was a choice, and now you get to live with it." I walked away, leaving her broken and alone. The house was eerily silent after that night. She barely spoke, her once confident demeanor now reduced to a shadow of its former self. Every day I watched her crumble under the weight of her actions, but I wasn't done yet. Her parents had cut her off completely. "You've disgraced us," her father had told her over the phone. I knew she was hoping they'd soften over time, but they didn't. Her mother refused to take her calls, and her siblings had blocked her on social media. At work, the pictures I had anonymously sent to her boss had done their job. She wasn't fired outright, but her colleagues now looked at her with judgment and disdain. The gossip spread quickly. Everyone knew about the affair. She was no longer the golden employee everyone admired. The younger guy, he had disappeared completely. After the coffee shop fiasco and losing his job, he wanted nothing to do with her. I intercepted one of his texts where he finally ended things. "You've ruined my life. Don't ever contact me again." She was left with nothing. No family, no friends, no lover, just me. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table in complete silence, she finally broke. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I set down my fork and looked at her. "Doing what?" I replied calmly. This coldness, this distance. I know I hurt you, but isn't there a way we can move past it?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Move past it? You destroyed everything we built and now you want to move past it? You don't even understand the depth of what you've done." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You didn't just cheat on me. You lied, you humiliated me, and you thought I'd never find out. You didn't care about me then, so why should I care about you now?" She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it was fleeting. The next day, I filed for divorce. I made sure she wouldn't see it coming. The papers were delivered to her at work in front of her colleagues. The humiliation was complete. That evening, she came home with the papers in hand, her face pale. "You're divorcing me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," I said simply. But we can fix this," she cried. "I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She begged and pleaded, but I didn't waver. The divorce process was swift. I had already moved all my assets to separate accounts, and with the evidence I had, she couldn't claim a single thing. On the day the divorce was finalized, she stood outside the courthouse looking lost and defeated. I walked past her without a word, feeling a strange sense of closure. But the real twist? I had one final surprise for her. I could have left it there, divorce papers signed, her life in shambles. But that wasn't enough. She needed to feel the same humiliation, the same pain I endured. And I had one final plan to make sure she'd never forget. A week after the divorce was finalized, I contacted her workplace one last time. This time, I didn't just send photos. I sent a detailed letter, exposing her affair and the lies she'd told to cover it up. By the end of the week, she was fired. She came home that evening, her face a mix of anger and despair. "I lost my job," she screamed. "Did you do this?" I didn't deny it. I just smiled. "Actions have consequences," I said, my tone calm. She threw a glass against the wall, her frustration boiling over. But I didn't care. I was already steps ahead. The next phase of my plan involved her lover, the man she risked everything for. I tracked him down, finding out where he had started working after his first job loss. He thought he'd escaped the chaos, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook. I sent an anonymous tip to his new employer, exposing his involvement in the affair. It didn't take long for them to let him go. With no job and no connections, he was forced to leave the city, abandoning any hope of rekindling his relationship with her. She called me one night, her voice breaking. "You've destroyed everything. My job, my family, my relationship. Why are you doing this?" "You did this to yourself," I replied coldly. "I'm just making sure you feel the consequences." But the final blow was still to come. A few weeks later, I hosted a small gathering with mutual friends and acquaintances. It was meant to be a celebration of new beginnings. I made sure to invite her, knowing she wouldn't miss a chance to try and rebuild her image. The night was going smoothly, with laughter and casual conversations. Then I stood up to give a speech. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I began. "This past year has been the most challenging of my life, but it's also been a time of growth and learning." I paused, looking directly at her. "I learned that trust is fragile, that betrayal can come from the people you least expect." The room went silent. She shifted uncomfortably, sensing where this was going. "And I also learned that sometimes the best way to move forward is to let go of the past. So tonight, I'd like to share something important with all of you." I pulled out a USB drive and plugged it into the TV. This time, it wasn't just photos or texts. It was a full timeline of her betrayal. From the late-night messages to the hotel visits, everything was laid out in chronological order. Her face turned white as the room watched in stunned silence. Some gasped, others whispered in disbelief. She tried to leave, but someone blocked the door. "You need to stay," they said. When the video ended, I looked at her one last time. "This is your legacy," I said. "I hope it was worth it." She left the party in tears, her reputation completely destroyed. After that night, I never saw her again. She left the city, moving back to her hometown in a desperate attempt to rebuild her life. But her reputation had already followed her. The people she once held close wanted nothing to do with her, and the whispers about her betrayal lingered wherever she went. As for me, I finally felt free. The weight I had carried for months was gone. I moved into a new home, started focusing on myself, and reconnected with old friends I had neglected during my marriage. One day I got a call from her mother. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "I know what she did to you and I don't blame you for what happened. But she's not the same person anymore." Her voice cracked as she continued, "She's struggling, you know. She's broken." I stayed silent for a moment, then replied, "She broke herself." It wasn't bitterness in my voice, but clarity. I had no more anger, no more pain. I wasn't the man who had been betrayed anymore. I was someone new, stronger, wiser, and unshakable. Weeks turned into months and life moved on. I never reached out to her, and she never tried to contact me again. Occasionally, I'd hear updates from mutual acquaintances about how she was working a small job, living paycheck to paycheck, and trying to piece her life together. Did I feel bad? Sometimes. But then I'd remember the nights I stayed up wondering why I wasn't enough, the lies she told me, the pain she caused. She made her choices, and I made mine. One evening, as I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the revenge, the fallout. It all felt like a distant memory now. I wasn't the same man who had been blindsided by her lies. I was someone who had taken control of his life, who refused to be a victim. And as the sun set that day, I realized one thing. I didn't need her apology, her regret, or her tears. All I needed was the peace I felt now, knowing I had stood up for myself. She was a part of my past, but my future was mine, and mine alone. With that thought, I stood up, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life.